Welcome back to another edition of This Month at the TNM. We're glad you're here. In recent years, opponents of Texas independence have more and more relied on fear instead of facts to make their case. One of their favorite tactics is to invoke the specter of military intervention following a successful TEXIT referendum. In this multi-part series, we'll take a look at why this is just that, a scare tactic. There are many aspects to this argument, and we'll take a look at it from several angles to shine the light of truth on it. The suggestion that the federal government would deploy military forces against Texans whose only crime was participating in a free and fair vote on self-determination betrays both a fundamental misunderstanding of modern political realities and a disturbing disconnect from basic democratic principles. The Texas nationalist movement has consistently advocated for a peaceful, lawful path to independence through the democratic process. This commitment isn't just strategic, it is foundational to our vision of Texas as a self-governing nation state that takes its place among the community of nations through the exercise of our right to self-determination. This principle, which is recognized globally and supported historically by the United States itself, stands in direct opposition to the use of military force to suppress the legitimate political will of a people. The thought that the federal government would respond to a democratic referendum with military force ignores several critical realities. First, such an action would instantly destroy America's credibility as an advocate for democratic principles worldwide. The United States has consistently championed the right of self-determination, from its support of Kosovo's independence to its backing of peaceful separation movements worldwide. Military intervention against Texas would expose this advocacy as hollow rhetoric and devastate American foreign policy objectives. Also, there are practical barriers to military intervention. As we've discussed in past programs, there are approximately 170,000 Texans currently serving in the United States military and 15 major military installations on Texas soil. Any attempt at military action would face not just logistical nightmares, but profound moral and constitutional crises within the military itself. The economic consequences alone would be catastrophic, threatening not just the American economy, but global markets as well. The threat of military intervention represents the last refuge of those who just can't win the debate on its own merits. It's a position that collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, suggesting that the federal government would respond to a lawful expression of democratic will by abandoning the very principle it claims to defend. As we take a more detailed look at this issue, we'll see why military intervention following a successful Texas referendum isn't just unlikely, it's practically impossible. The combination of legal, strategic, economic, and moral factors creates a pretty much insurmountable barrier to such actions, showing these threats for what they really are: desperate attempts to discourage Texans from exercising their fundamental right to self-government. The right of self-determination stands as one of the most fundamental principles in modern international relations. Since the end of the Second World War, the number of self-governing nations has nearly quadrupled, with each successful movement reinforcing this basic human right. Recent history provides clear examples of how peaceful democratic processes have become the accepted standards for pursuing independence in Western nations. The 2014 Scottish independence referendum set a powerful precedent for how modern democracies handle the questions of self-determination. The British government didn't threaten military action, they engaged in the democratic process. When 84.6% of Scottish voters turned out to make their choice, the highest recorded participation for any vote in British history, the result was respected, even by those who opposed independence. Similarly, Brexit showed that even long established political unions can be dissolved through peaceful, democratic means when the people choose a different path. These examples underscore a really important point. High voter participation in independence referenda legitimizes outcomes in ways that really exclude military intervention. When 85 to 90% of eligible voters participate in such decisions, which is pretty typical for independence votes, the result carries a moral and political weight that can't be dismissed or overturned through force without sacrificing all pretense of democratic legitimacy. The Texas Constitution itself provides the clearest legal foundation for our right to self determination. Article 1, Section 2 states unequivocally all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit. The faith of the people of Texas stands pledged to the preservation of a republican form of government, and, subject to this limitation only, they have at all times the inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in any such manner as they may think expedient. This fundamental right to alter, reform, or abolish our government has never been repealed or amended. It remains as binding today as when it was first written. Also, Article 1, Section 22 of the Texas Constitution creates a critical legal barrier to military intervention by classifying actions against the lawfully established government of Texas as treason. This provision would place any Texan serving in the U.S. military in an impossible position if ordered to act against their own state after a legitimate referendum. Modern legal scholars are recognizing more and more that peaceful withdrawal through democratic means is really quite different from secession by a unilateral action. The first one represents an exercise of legitimate political authority derived from the consent of the governed, us. And this is a core principle that the United States itself was founded on. The latter, however, usually involves extra-legal actions that might justify federal response. This distinction is crucial because it frames TEXIT not as an act of rebellion or defiance, but as the legitimate exercise of fundamental political rights guaranteed by our own Constitution. Any military action taken against Texans for exercising these rights would itself represent an unconstitutional overreach, one that would likely be looked at as illegitimate by military personnel sworn to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When we examine the legal and historical foundations for peaceful withdrawal, we find that military intervention becomes not just unlikely, but really legally indefensible. The right of self determination, which is enshrined in both international norms and our own Constitution, provides a clear path forward that aligns with democratic principles and the rule of law. This framework makes military action against a legitimate exercise of these rights not just improbable, but fundamentally at odds with the constitutional principles that both Texas and the United States claim to uphold. The legal foundations for lawful withdrawal go way beyond Texas constitutional provisions. When looking at federal obligations, we find that the United States has repeatedly committed itself to respecting the right of self determination through various international agreements and treaties. The United Nations Charter, which the United States helped draft and was among the first to sign, explicitly recognizes the principle of self determination of peoples. The Helsinki Final Act, another cornerstone of American foreign policy, reaffirms this commitment. This creates an interesting legal paradox for those who would advocate for military intervention. The United States government would find itself in the position of violating its own treaty obligations, which, according to the Constitution, are the supreme law of the land, by using force to prevent Texans from exercising a right that the United States has pledged to respect internationally. The historical record further reinforces why military intervention against a peaceful democratic process would be unprecedented in modern American history. Even during the height of the Civil War, the federal government's military response was triggered not by democratic processes, but by unilateral actions and military aggression. No state in that conflict had pursued independence through a legitimate referendum with high voter participation. This distinction is crucial because it highlights how a peaceful TEXIT referendum would create an entirely different legal and political framework, one that would make military intervention not just unpopular, but legally questionable. The evolution of international law since World War II has created a robust framework supporting peaceful self determination. The International Court of Justice's advisory opinion on Kosovo's declaration of independence affirmed that unilateral declarations of independence are not contrary to international law, particularly when they follow democratic process. The United States not only supported this opinion, but actively championed Kosovo's right to self-determination, a precedent that would make any military action against Texas appear hypocritical on the world stage. The legitimacy of peaceful withdrawal is further strengthened by examining how other democratic nations handle similar situations. Canada's Clarity Act, passed in response to Quebec sovereignty movements, explicitly acknowledges that a clear expression of democratic will must be respected, even if it means negotiating separation. This modern approach to self determination stands in stark contrast to the antiquated notion that military force is an appropriate response to peaceful democratic processes. These historical and legal foundations create an insurmountable barrier to military intervention following a successful Texit referendum. They demonstrate that the path to independence through peaceful, democratic means is not just possible, but it's increasingly recognized as a legitimate modern approach to resolving questions of political sovereignty. Any attempt to use military force against such a process would not only violate established legal principles, but it would undermine the very foundations of democratic governments that the United States claims to champion. In future programs, we'll take a look at some other myths surrounding the federal military and how it would, or wouldn't, be used as we seek our independence. This fear tactic is being used by some in hopes that you believe our independence is not only a bad thing, but would be dangerous. The way to fight Project Fear is with knowledge, and that's what we're trying to do here. Thanks for joining us this month. We'll see you again next time.